Hey everybody, and today we are talking An Echo of Things to Come. So I'm going to be spoiling this book fully, so if you have not read An Echo of Things to Come and you mind spoilers, steer clear of this video. Go away right now, because I am definitely going to be talking about everything that happens in this book potentially. At the very least, I'm going to be spoiling the ending for you guys. You can tell that by the title, so definitely save yourself and walk away right now. But if you are still here with me right now, that means you are eager to talk about the ending of An Echo of Things to Come, or potentially you're just here because you gave up on this book and you want to know what happened in it. So in order to talk about the ending, I'm going to briefly recap a lot of the things that happened within this book. I'm not going to go into huge detail with a lot of these timelines, but what I am going to go into detail with is Kaden's timeline, because basically this is the reason for this video. Basically finishing An Echo of Things to Come, I was like, what? This is a reread for me. I reread this book because the first time that I read An Echo of Things to Come, I was left being like, I am so lost. And so I felt like, because it had been like almost a year since I read The Shadow of What Was Lost, that was the fault. I was like, yeah, I took too much time between the two books and I lost too much of the backstory. But no, that was not the case, because upon reread I feel exactly the same, and I feel like I had a pretty good recollection of the events of book one, and I just thought like, okay, it's just some of that world building that went into book one that I probably lost, but I definitely don't really feel like my closer acquaintance with book one now helped me understand book two. So what I did is I went through every single Kaden chapter again within An Echo of Things to Come to recreate what we learned, what we found out in his memories. So I'll leave that for a little bit of a later section. Let's first just kind of quickly run through like a broad overline of what happens within An Echo of Things to Come, talking about the ending, and then I'll give my sort of like timeline for Kaden's perspectives. So let's start with the perspective of Daven. Daven goes to Tol Shen as he had promised to his shell, and they plan to try and convince the elders there to go to the boundary to try and figure out a way to strengthen the boundary. However, the elders are quite reluctant. They don't really take the threat all that seriously, and they are quite fearful of the augurs, and they clearly are keeping some secrets. In their time there, they are joined by Fessi and Aaron, who were also augurs that we met in book one, and they are kind of more on the background because they don't really trust the situation, so they don't want to expose themselves to the elders. We have a new augur appearing, Rohin, horrible character, who basically takes control over the entire toll in their attempt to try and basically contain Rohin. They have to break into a vault that the elders were hiding from them, and they steal an artifact that controls Rohin's power. They then finally decide it is time to move north. They go to the boundary. On the way there, they are attacked by Sharatar, and Ishel is pierced by many of their weapons. She is saved by Daven, but afterwards she acts very bizarrely, and there are moments in time in which she seems to not be in control of her actions. And so when they reach the boundary, they are trying to inspect the boundary as best as possible, trying to figure out, okay, how does this device work and how can we potentially strengthen it? And during their trips to the boundary, they find a door. Now the door is a door that can be opened by augurs, and Ishel seems to be unnaturally drawn to it. I will leave Daven's story for now, and let's move on to Asha. Asha during this book is very much trying to figure out the backstory of what shadows are. She is secretly going down into the sanctuary to try and figure out more about the shadows, and in one of those trips she acquires a supernatural weapon as well. Throughout the book she notices that she and the other shadows are having regular fainting spells. They are regularly feeling dizzy, getting weak, and she wants to move to Delanis to try and figure out in the library over there what the library knows about the origin stories of shadows. And she goes down to Delanis together with Breshada, who we've met in book one, who was a hunter there who has come into powers due to mysterious circumstances. In the library, Asha finds out a story about a ruler called Seren. Seren was a highly talented, gifted person who in secret was creating shadows in order to feed power into himself. He was first doing this clandestinely, but when he accumulated enough power, he overthrew the current government and subdued many of the gifted, made many of the gifted into shadows to further accumulate power for himself. At first, these shadows were still allowed to roam freely, however, that made them vulnerable to attack, and if they are killed, then that is less power for him, and therefore he started to imprison them. And we see that a plot was established to kill off a large part of these shadows in order to then be able to drain a lot of Sarah's power and potentially steal this device that was allowing him to drain their magic, which is a siphon. The siphon will come in handy later. And then we see an overlap with Kaden's storyline and Asha's storyline, where Kaden shows up, and then we find out that Brishada has actually been Nadgala all along, a creature from the Darklands, which I will talk about more when we get to Kaden's storyline. Due to circumstances, basically, Nadgala now has the siphon in her power, so the shadows are actually being drained of their power by Nadgala. It is feeding into her power. But she provokes Asha to strike her down with a blade, and as a consequence, Nadgala's reserve moves over into Asha's body. Asha is healed from being a shadow, and Asha now holds control over the siphon, meaning that the power of the shadows will now drain into Asha, meaning that she becomes a perfect subject for Kaden's plan to strengthen the boundary. Asha moves to the north. We will meet up with them later. Then we have Wur's timeline. Wur, in his timeline, is mainly dealing with the problems of authority. He has come into the position of North Warden after the death of his father, and as he is a gifted, many people in administration and outside of it resent him for this position. They feel like he is the wrong person to be in power, and some of the decisions that he is making they don't agree with, because they feel like he has given more power to gifted than they are entitled to. He is then constantly struggling throughout his book to gain power and authority, to keep power and authority, and especially to try and convince people to take the threat of the boundary seriously. Even though they have been in this conflict with the blind only just recently, people still seem to see it as the odd one out and don't seem to think that there is an actual chance that the boundary is going to fall. Wur is attacked one night, and he is saved by Skyner, who tells him that if he goes to his ancestral home, he will find a diary in his father's study that will clarify some things to him. So he goes to his ancestral home, where we see a lot of tension between him and his mother. His mother, like his father previously, very much hates augurs and gifted alike because of their experiences in the war. And whether his father had taken a turn, though in book 1 we find out that his father was actually under control, his mother always stayed clear to the cause. And so there's a lot of tension and conflict between them. She is actually even hiding his sister from him because she doesn't want him to influence her. Wur finds this diary that talks about a secret rebellion within the augurs, and he also finds a stone, an oath stone, that can be used, that he later finds out that with his power he actually can use to control people. He accidentally uses his power when he is confronted by his mother to allow his sister to join him back to Ilin Ilan. His mother also reveals to him that his father had been under control, and that the change in his perspective did not arise from having a son who was gifted, but that the change came because he was under control. Wur goes back to Ilin Ilan, continues his fight for authority, but then Ilin Ilan is attacked by Isiliar, a Venerate who's on a revenge spur, let's say. And in this attack, his sister is heavily wounded, and his mother, of course, decides to come over to Ilin Ilan in order to challenge him for his authority. And now he has to try and convince the voting class that he is the best fit to be North Warden. In the end, he decides to go take a little bit of a gamble, and he says, everybody who is willing to accompany me to the boundary right now, I want to show you the threat, and in exchange, if you are still not convinced, then I will step down as North Warden. So we have everybody at this point in time, except for Kaden, meeting up at the boundary. So at the boundary, what happens is that Ishel, in one of her vague, uncontrollable fits, moves through the door, separating this side from the other side of the boundary. And Fessy and Daven see this, and so they also follow after her, go through the door. However, when they turn around to try and go back through it, the door is no longer there. They still kind of hope that Aaron can potentially find them and open the door on his side of the boundary. But when we meet up with Aaron, as he is inspecting the boundary, we see that also on that side of the boundary, the door has been closed now. Asha and Aaron now go and look for a device that they need in order to strengthen the boundary. And Davian, Ishel and Fessy follow Ishel's gut instinct because she has a feeling that there is a place that they need to go to. While they're following Ishel, they find this sort of like army of flying creatures, and it seems like Ishel is able to communicate with them, and through their mind they read that they can kind of cross the boundary again if they wear the blind's armor. Unfortunately, there is only one set of armor available, so they decide to give this to Ishel as she is too vulnerable up here on this side of the boundary, and so they go back to the boundary, push Ishel through. They are closely followed by a massive army that is amassing at the boundary, and unfortunately they cannot pass through. Meantime, some of this army has already been passing through in moments of weakness, and they have been attacking the fortress where Caroline and his mother are. And in this conflict, Wer's mother finally understands the importance of getting people to the boundary, of manning these fortresses, of finding a way to strengthen the boundary again. And so she agrees to go back to Elinelan and to help him in his cause. Unfortunately, in their delay to try and give these fallen soldiers a decent death, some of them start to resurrect and one of them kills Wer's mother. This is more or less where we leave Wer's timeline at this point of the book. And then with Asha, we see her at the boundary. She is waiting for Farron's sign that she can close the boundary, but she also has a visual on the boundary itself. Through Farron, she's able to contact Davian, who tells her of their plan to push Ishel through, and they do tell her that there is this opportunity to potentially steal other armors, but she's aware that they're basically just kind of telling a wishful lie, and so she has to close the boundary in time so that this massive army cannot pass through, even though she knows that this will mean that Davian is trapped on the other side. Davian and Fessy are now trapped on the wrong side of the boundary, and they're taken hostage by this army. And a few of the soldiers within this army basically force them into a massive fortress where it seems like there will be some sort of like games to the death, and that people don't tend to survive for very long. But they're told as well that they cannot go up to the first floor because there's a captive there that one of the Fennerets is very interested in. Fessy now recognizes this location from a vision she has had earlier in the book, and she decides to run away because she cannot handle the things that she has seen in her vision. And so, because of the fact that Kaden is so difficult to grasp on this side of the boundary, she has to leave Davian behind her, so Davian is stuck on his own in this fortress. We will leave Davian's story for a little bit, and now let's move to Kaden. So Kaden is the big issue here, because Kaden throughout this book is on a journey of discovery, of finding out what his past is really like, because as we saw in book 1, he had lost all of his memories. And so we in this book are going to find out like who is Kaden and what is his whole storyline about, because we've only had very vague hints up until this point. And so for this I had to do a lot of research. I went through all of Kaden's perspectives, I wrote down everything that was important, then I rewrote everything in order to try and get a little bit of a timeline for not just Kaden, but basically this whole world to some extent. And so we're going to go through that before I can actually go into the full like wow, this ending type of discussion, I guess. So here goes. Basically, the mythology of this world that we're going to start with is that there was a conflict between two gods called El and Shamalot, and Shamalot trapped El on this plane. He trapped him by trapping him in time, trapping him in destiny. The existence of Khan basically binds everybody, as well as El, to destiny, to fate. Now, El, as a last sort of like effort on his side, creates the Venerate, who are beings that were not taken into account originally, and so while they still have to adhere to this rule of destiny, of fate, while they're still linked to time, they are unforeseen elements who can therefore potentially impact destiny, impact fate. Now, with Kaden, because of his memories being out of order, I am not always fully sure about the order of the visions that we see, of the memories that we see. So some of these might be slightly out of order. But so basically we found out that Kaden is a lord and that he cannot be killed. We basically at one point see him attempting to be decapitated because he has found out that he cannot be killed, and this is one of his tests that he does to prove this to himself. One of the biggest moments of his history is that he used to be a lord and he was married to a beautiful woman called Eliavia. She was the love of his life. However, at their wedding reception, she was lured outside and killed and left in a ditch there. He, when he found her, was distraught and tried to draw essence from everything around him, in the process killing many people around him as well as destroying the land. However, it seemed to be in vain. However, we meet up with him years later as he is basically now dedicating his life to killing monsters and drinking, and in the tavern where he's recovering from his latest monster hunt, his eye is drawn to a woman who reminds him very much of his wife Eliavia, and she indicates that she is actually his wife. She is his resurrected wife. He thought that she hadn't come back, but she did eventually come back. He, of course, is over the moon, but while he is on one of his monster hunts, he is met by a mysterious creature, a mysterious man in the woods, who tells him that Eliavia is not who she tells him she is. She is not his resurrected wife. She is actually a creature from the Darklands called Netgala. When he confronts his wife with this information, she ultimately admits that yes, she is Netgala, she is a creature from the Darklands. She basically, when Kaden was trying to resurrect his wife, he used a power that he was not aware that he has. He used the power to draw energy from other realms, and so he drew Netgala from the Darklands into his wife's body. Netgala has all of the memories of his wife, therefore also having the love that Eliavia had for him. And so she wants Kaden to accept her. She wants to live out her life with Kaden, so she will be stalking him throughout history, trying to get him to be his wife again. Kaden cannot accept her and he then runs away. I believe the next memory that we can fit into this timeline is a memory of him being locked away by Alaris, another one of the Venerate. So he is locked away for some 80 years by Alaris because he was apparently out of control. And during this time they talk about how Kaden was looking for the mysterious man that he found in the woods. And this is why I'm kind of expecting this memory to be located here, but it can also kind of be located just a little bit later as well. But basically Alaris releases Kaden into the world, and Kaden sets out to look for this mysterious man again. And then he is visited by Gazandrid. Gazandrid is also one of the Venerate, and Gazandrid is a firm believer in El, and he believes that the mysterious man in the woods that Kaden met is actually El. So he recruits Kaden to be part of his group of Venerate who are basically serving El as El tries to be released from his prison, be released from this realm, be released from time. He wants to break fate, he wants to break destiny, because as long as there is such a thing as destiny, our choices are never fully free. We make our choices, but if they're already predetermined, then how is that actually a choice? For a very long time, the Venerate work together in harmony. They are definitely a found family who work together to overthrow evil lords, for example. example. And during one of these campaigns, they stumble upon somebody with a weapon that is able to counteract some of their powers. And that is basically like one of the first moments in which tension really starts to build within this group, because they feel like it is only possible for a weapon like this to exist with the aid of one of their own. So they feel like somebody within their group has basically become a traitor to their cause. Around this time, Elle gives an assignment to Kaden, and only to Kaden. And it is an assignment to kill the Duressians and to create the Plains of Decay, basically destroying the homeland of the Duressians so that they have no choice but to go to Andara, to go to Delanis, the rift between the worlds. And Elle's plan is that if they go to Delanis, they will try to use the rift in order to travel back in time, warn their ancestors. And Elle himself is very interested in this creation of a time travel device, because he wants that device as well to be able to travel to a world where none of this has happened, to travel to a world where he is free of time. Kaden initially objects to these plans because they are brutal plans. It involves the genocide of an entire people almost. And so he of course has severe reservations about this plan. However, Elle tells him it is needed. They need this situation in order for their technology to advance to the point where they are able to make this time travel device. If we want to free humanity of destiny, we have to take this step. And then he further assuages Kaden by basically taking the responsibility on himself and saying, you are just a blade. You are executing my choices, my plan. You are not to be blamed. I'm to be blamed. And so it is that point in time that Kaden, who has been going through life as Talcamar at that point in time, takes on the name of Arcane the Vade, an alter ego that he creates in order to distance himself from the acts that he is performing at this point in time. And so when the other Venard find out about what he has done, there is initially a lot of resentment, there's a lot of anger towards Kaden. They reject the notion that Elle is the one who told Kaden to do these things. They cannot, their idea of what Elle stands for cannot be reconciled with the acts that Kaden has actually performed at this point in time. So we see the Venard starting to fall apart. However, they are still definitely continuing with their plans. But then we see that Kaden gets a little bit restless because of the acts that he has to perform in the past. I guess he wants this conflict to be over as quickly as possible. So he at some point in time goes to Delanus when Elle has told him to not do this yet. And he wants to activate the device there in order for this whole story to be over. However, the High Duressians who are in the Lioness at this point in time are aware of his plans somehow, and they think that they had thwarted him by making the time travel device, not knowing that it was actually Kaden's plan for them to have this. But what he was not aware of is that they also created something else, a sort of black torque that they placed on their bodies, and their idea was that if they placed this torque around their bodies, they would become immune to Khan, which is the only way in which they can use the time travel device. Unfortunately, something goes wrong and they start to dissipate immediately. Kaden sees what is happening, and in desperation he creates a portal to Rescarta, which, don't ask me why, is apparently the perfect place for this people to go to in order for them to survive. He manages to get some 100 people through the portal, and he sees that they are surviving over there. But from that point in time, they are stuck there because of the atmospheric circumstances in Rescarta, I guess. They are able to survive only there, so they are stuck in Rescarta from that moment onwards. Kaden now is free to use the Javet, the time travel device. He tries to activate it, but he was not aware of all of the intricacies involved, and so the device actually explodes. There's an act that happens here at this point in time that I'm going to skip for the time being, and I'm going to revisit later. So next, when we meet up with Kaden, we see that he has started to doubt whether Elle is who Elle says that he is. He has also met up with, what is his name? With Andrael, who also doubts Elle, and who actually thinks that Elle is just secretly Shamalot, and secretly what he just wants is to destroy the world, or basically if he were to break free from time, what would happen is that the Darklands would also become free, and that the Darklands would actually invade this world. And so Andrael also admits at that point in time that he also created these 5 magical blades that can counteract the powers of the Venerate. Now, Kaden starts to doubt, and he wants to stall El's plan. We see the Venerate definitely breaking apart at this point in time over his actions. They can kind of agree with his past murders of the Russians because he was doing it in El's name. He was doing it to further El's plan. But now that he has turned away from El, now that he is thwarting El, they definitely don't want, definitely cannot forgive him for that. But so Kaden starts a plan in order to stall El, and so his plan is to create a boundary that will keep El and his associates stuck on that side of the boundary. And the way to create this boundary and to feed this boundary is to enslave basically Meldior and Isiliar, 2 of his Venerate friends, into a device that he calls the Tributary. The Tributary will pierce their skin, that draws essence, and that essence, rather than healing them, will be subtracted by the device and will then feed the boundary. However, for the second part of his plan, he needs Licanius. How Licanius came into the hands of the Lits, the descendants of the Hydoricians, I am not sure, but basically he needs to go to the Lit and try to get his hands on Licanius. However, they have created a sort of spell around it so that the only people who can get Licanius are people who don't want Licanius. So after a few failed attempts, he finally decides to strip his memories and leave himself this portal box that will eventually lead him to Licanius, hoping that by the time he gets to Licanius, he will be somebody who is there, not for Licanius himself, since he has no memories of it. Then all the events of Book 1 take place. Kaden eventually gets to Licanius and takes control of Licanius. However, after he touches Licanius, he now is entered into a contract with the Lit, basically meaning he has 1 year and 1 day to free the Lit from their jail in Rescarta. I guess in exchange for Licanius, or maybe in exchange for his life, not entirely sure. Main events in this book, aside from all of his memories, are that Isiliar has found a way to escape from the Tributary. This of course already happens prior to Book 1, I guess, so yeah, that's a little bit wrong in my order, sorry for that. And then during this book, Kaden also frees Meldior from the Tributary, meaning he is further weakening the boundary, because the 2 people feeding power into the boundary have now disappeared. So Kaden realizes at some point throughout this book that he needs the siphon, because he needs to create a new link to the boundary in order to put somebody else in a Tributary and be able to strengthen the boundary again. This is when we see him at Delanis being confronted by Nadgala, and this is when Asha becomes the new source of power for the Tributary. So before putting her in a Tributary, he now has the opportunity to go to the Lit and to offer them a deal. Basically, the deal is if they allow themselves to be turned into shadows, then they will become reserves, and that apparently means that they are free from outside influence and that they are protected from the impact of whatever is keeping them in Rescarta, meaning that they are free to walk free. The Lit decides to agree to this offer in exchange for Kaden transporting them to their homeland of the Resi afterwards, and so it is done. And at that point in time, because of the Lit being bound and Asha feeling the increase in her reserve, she enters into the Tributary to strengthen the boundary. Kaden now goes to the final place on this portal box where he is attacked by Meldior and Isiliar. Isiliar dies in this conflict, but Meldior regains consciousness. Kaden is knocked unconscious, and the next time we meet up with him is when Daven is in the fortress. So Daven is in this fortress. He has just been abandoned by Fessi, and he goes to the first floor where he sees Gazandrid torturing Kaden, asking for the location of a she, We don't actually really know who that she is. And Daven interrupts this conversation, and even though Cassandra tries to turn Daven against Kaden by telling him that Kaden is actually Arcane Devate, Daven decides to trust his old friend, and he kills Cassandra. At that point in time, Kaden is still stuck by this sort of contraption keeping him in place, so he tells Daven to kill him, because he will be reborn in a new body, he will be released from this prison, and then he can go and look for Daven in the future. Daven does so and is now back in custody in the hands of his captives, who probably will treat him less mildly at this point in time, knowing that he is a runner. And then Kaden is reborn into a new body, and he shapes back into the previous body of Kaden because he likes that body more, and he is very much touched by Davian's trust in him and wants to turn his life around, basically. But that is also the moment in which a vision, a memory strikes, and he remembers the moment right after he destroyed the Javets in Delanis, in which he had a change of heart, and it turns out that it was actually future Daven who went back in time to warn Kaden that he was being manipulated by Elle, that Elle was lying to him, and that Kaden was actually a bad man doing bad things, and that he needed to be stopped. And so yeah, that's where the book ends. I need to go now. I have an appointment, but I will come back to discuss this ending. Alright, it's the next day and I'm here to give you my second half of this because I came home too late yesterday to be able to still film a second part to this video. But so I am very excited about what's going to be coming in The Light of All That Falls, right? Third book in the series. First of all, I'm super curious about what they're going to do with Asha's storyline, because, you know, Asha is now stuck in this tributary, so in principle this means that she's kind of like out of scope for the next book, for at least a part of it, you would say, unless they kind of do like a time jump to a time in which she's taken out of the tributary. But at the same time, I think we cannot do a time jump for Daven, for example, or I wouldn't want to see a time jump for Daven. So I'm curious to see how they handle that, whether maybe in Asha's perspective we're gonna see some of her like thought processes, or maybe some of the I don't know, maybe she'll be seeing certain things while she's in the tributary or things like that. I have no idea what's gonna happen with Asha's timeline in terms of this in like this plot twist, I guess, this development towards the end of the book of her being in the tributary. And I didn't revisit, like, there's a chapter in book 1 in which Daven, future Daven, visits Asha. And I didn't revisit that chapter to kind of see what he kind of implied about Asha's future at that point in time. She was given some instructions about Kaden, right, at that point in time, but I think that is, we've already had that section, I feel like, right? He warned, she had to give a warning about Netgala, I believe, to Kaden, so we've already had that thing, and I don't know whether there's more in that chapter to kind of give us an inclination about what's going to happen with Asha in this final book. But I mean, definitely at some point in time she's going to have to leave that tributary in order for there to be a storyline involving her in the third book. And then let's get to Daven, because Davian's perspective is the one that I'm most excited about for book 3. This sort of idea that he's like, it's only hinted at of course so far, but like they're calling him like a runner, they're indicating that there are like very few people who make it through like even a week in that prison that he's currently in. So I'm expecting some sort of like game situation where maybe he has to like run a maze or something like that, you know, where maybe he is like being attacked by people. I'm expecting some sort of like gladiator situation when it comes to Daven. And of course he will at some point in time then be rescued from there by Kaden, let's hope. And so yeah, but I'm really excited about that first part, and that's why I don't want there to be a sort of like time jump to a point in time in which he's like in that jail, but maybe like a legend for having stuck with it for such a long time already. I want to go to the nitty-gritty of like his first experiences in that jail, so there cannot be a time jump for me when it comes to Davian's perspective. And then with Wur, I guess like all bets are kind of off, like what is Wur's timeline is going to be like, because yeah, he has Caroline support at least, but now his mother has passed away, so she was kind of like the last, she was kind of that hope for convincing the others of the risk and stuff of the boundary. And now that the boundary is reinforced, what is going to be his timeline? I have really no idea what I'm supposed to be expecting with the timeline of Wur, or whether I should already have some inclinations about that. What is going to happen with that whole sort of like oat stone, for example, that he has in his possession at this point in time. Wur is like a big, like, you know, with Asha, I'm just like, I don't see where this story can go because of her circumstances. With Wur, I'm like, it can go like any direction, because I feel like we've kind of really rounded off his storyline within book 2 without setting up anything for book 3 yet. And then I'm hoping, of course, that we're gonna see something with Ishel. And so if we're gonna see something with Ishel, then I feel like Ishel needs to follow Wur in terms of the perspective, or we get a new perspective, but that would also be somewhat weird to have like a new perspective in the 3rd book. So I feel like Ishel needs to be a part of Wur's storyline at this point in time, and so that is probably the direction then that has to happen with Wur, that he somehow is involved with Ishel and that sort of like weird fugue stage that she sometimes gets into. And Kaden is another one that I'm like, okay, so we know for certain that he's going to try, or like for certain maybe not, but we can assume that he is still, even in spite of like the vision he saw at the end, he's still gonna do his best to try and save Daven. But considering like his whole sort of like power gamma, that sounds like not that much of a big deal, so certainly there has to be some sort of an obstacles thrown in his way. And of course we still need to round off this entire story arc of the whole thing with trying to seal the rift, and so we've had indications that his plan is to seal the rift and then kill like everybody who can manipulate Khan. But obviously that's not going to be a very satisfactory ending, because that would mean that we lose Daven, Essie, Farron, Ishel, that we lose so many of our big characters within this series. So that's obviously not really ideal. So I'm very curious to see how we're fixing that. But so, if you've read An Egg of Things to Come, let me know down below what your thoughts are on the ending, what your thoughts are on, you know, that book, its role within the series. Do not spoil, please, The Light of All That Falls for me. I will be diving into it straight after filming this video, but still, I will still be going through it when this video comes out. So don't spoil anything about the 3rd book. Let's just keep it to 1st and 2nd book in this video. But so, thank you guys for watching this video, and I hope to see you guys very soon for the next one. Bye!